It's an honor to be able to talk to you today. I'll try and talk slowly so that the translators can keep up. I'm going to take a slightly different tack to Didier because obviously he has brilliantly outlined the technical sort of revolution that's hitting our industry and the importance of how we've got to embrace it. However, there are other areas within the innovating that we need to look at, and that's how we deal with our clients, share information. So what I'll do, for those that aren't aware of who GES are, we are an American-based company based in Las Vegas. We're a $1 billion US turnover company. However, we have a very strong presence here in Europe, the Middle East, and we do work all over the world. I'm going to try and talk from a perspective because this is a particular subject that could go on for an entire day. So I've tried to sort of keep it to another area, which is what are we doing with our clients that are looking to work in the various different geographies that our great industry does. And I think one of the things is that we have this international language of English, and something that I've learned is that we have to be very careful, especially the English, or the Great British, is how we use our own language. We, I think, can make it very complicated and we have to internationalize it by not using overly complicated English words. And that's an innovation in itself, although very low tech, very important, because communication is really what's going to drive everything. Some of the examples of the challenges that we have when we take on a client that's looking to do a case in point. I have a client who goes from doing some work in San Francisco and Boston to Canada, to Stockholm, to Vienna, to Dubai, is how do we communicate with them all the various different challenges of dealing with in those individual sectors. There are cultural issues and there are all sorts of other challenging issues. For example, in America, there's the dreaded word drayage, which for those that aren't fully aware of it, it's almost like a black art. It's never very easily understood, and for especially Europeans going into the American market, it's very difficult to explain. So what we try to do is we try to centralize the team that looks after them and tries to talk to them on a basis that can actually communicate and educate across all the global geographies, but very importantly, they actually interface with our local partners, and so that they are working very closely to what our promise is. So effectively what GES tries to do is it tries to act globally, but deliver locally. And I think we need to try and think more and more like that. I think we need to come out of our own areas, because I think the world is, our little world is exploding, and I think there's excuse the expression, I'm going to refer to it. The future is already here, it's just not been evenly distributed. And as Didier quite dramatically has shown, that our industry is in for quite a change. And I've been to quite a few presentations where this is becoming more and more apparent. But at the same time, I think it's very exciting. Here's an opportunity for us to grab our industry, and I talk as a supplier, and we're starting to have many more conversations with organizers, PCOs, and venues, and having to talk collectively together to come up with solutions that are going to be very interactive, that's going to work with all of this. Other areas of innovation that are changing, I've talked about relationship. Construction, obviously. Construction is always going through a basis of innovation, because whatever happens, there's going to be a meeting point. We're entering a virtual world where our communities are basically going to be talking to each other for 365 days of the year, but we've still got to turn up to that 3-4 day event and make it impactful. Some of the images that you'll have seen on there is that our environments are going to change. The structure of the show floor is going to change. And that's what we need to spend more time thinking and brainstorming amongst each other how to do it. Us as suppliers, what can we bring to the party? Venues, how else can we think about using the environments? And the PCO and the organisers, because obviously they're in touch with their client base, the exhibitors, as well as the audience part, the attendees, who, through this form of new media, are going to be now interacting with us a lot more instead of us just turning up, presenting a show, and then expecting them to like what we've put on. We're going to be criticised a lot more, and we need to listen. So, talking about the event format, I know that there's areas that's changing, and it's open to whatever type of show, but we have an example where instead of the classic shell scheme and space only that's built up, we have a client that deliberately only chooses, if they're going to have an exhibition environment, it's allied to a conference that's feeding into it, but they then have only 3 types of exhibition stands, so they make sure that the actual that everybody feels more on a level playing field. Now that's only possible with certain types of industry sectors. Obviously B2C, where if you've got retail, that's not possible. We've got a lot of clients that want to be able to show a lot of product. But we spend a lot of time working with trying to how we can make that much more interactive for our clients. So, as I said, going back to the various geographies, so we have to deal with trying to take communities going to North America, into Europe, into the Middle East, and every single one of these areas requires something different. And I think working with your local partners is terribly important. One thing I would like to bring up is the use of email. Now, this may seem very obvious, but one thing we're finding is innovating the way that you spend your time. We have a client that constantly wants to email every time they have a thought. We also then do the same back to them, and what we found out is that we're exhausting each other's time, and what we need to try and do is pare back on that, make sure that we spend time at the end of the day sending this information out. They then respond to it, because our time is so very, very important. We can't buy any more time. So going back onto the technology side, one of the things that we're having to spend a lot of time is understanding the ROI, return on investment, for what clients are trying to get out of it. You know, a lot more interaction. It's the lead generation or through data registration. How are we capturing that data? How we use it? How are we working with that on the stand? How are we using the technology that's out there so that the moment somebody's been onto the stand, they've had an experience with your stand staff or the actual stand itself. They've left. You then are able to then send information back to them via an SMS text message that says, "Thank you very much." Anything we can do to make them feel more involved with our community. This will then extend into everything else that Didier was saying, is that the communities are then basically going to be starting before and afterwards and continuing all the way through. And hopefully, as the experiences get better and better, they're then going to be able to be encouraging more people to come to the event. So in many respects, one will feed the other. Are there any questions that anybody has that me do that? So I think that in summary, there needs to be greater control and planning through what we're going to be doing, through all the digital media that's coming out, also with your suppliers. I think being able to talk a lot earlier with the exhibitor. So for those people that have an exhibitor base, encourage them to work with their suppliers a lot earlier on. They'll be able to engage and come up with much more meaningful content that will interface with all the elements that they're doing through social media, blogging, Twittering. And it's really important that we make this marriage work between the historic face-to-face, and I sit here very much classically talking about, as a supplier, literally the meat and two veg, if you want to call it, of building stuff for people in different geographies and interfacing it with this digital native community. And as I said, clear communication is what's going to do it. And very importantly, not be scared to change the status quo. We are, as a company, having to look constantly and listen to our audience, which is predominantly exhibitors and organisers. What else can we do to add value to the show floor? And I just encourage as much of that coming back as possible.